Wow. Well, it's an artful neighborhood that we live in here in the Gowanus.
Can we come in?
You certainly may.
Is this the tour I've been told about?
Well, I don't know of what you've been told.
Well,
but come on in because it's cold out. Come on. We got the door open.
Did you get some mass mail?
Now look at, hi Paul, Mr. Eggman, Esquire. Anyway, it's a nice neighborhood. They're really sweet people. I really love my neighborhood. So, why do I work on eggs? That's the question people always ask. Well, I always tell people I work on eggs because I grew up in a Ukrainian family. Actually, this photo here, I like to keep up. This photo it's actually a copy of a photo. But this has my two uncles and my grandmother. This is in my mother's side of the family, and her in-laws. So these are my grandparents, great-grandparents. And if you notice, my uncle here is holding up an egg. Because I come from a Ukrainian family on both sides, and I learned the traditional art of Ukrainian Easter eggs. I'll show you a little book in here. This is a really interesting book because it has pages and pages of traditional design. And actually, the truth of the matter is that this form of artwork is actually really a form of witchcraft, because what they're doing is using the power of life that's in an egg, and they're taking the power of the egg, and it should be a fertile egg. This one isn't. It should be a fertile egg because it has the life power in it. And they're drawing symbols on the eggshell to turn that egg into a talisman for various purposes. And the designs that you see in this book are actually kind of like a language. It's an alphabet of symbology, of intention and meaning, because the symbol would tell you what the purpose of the egg would be, whether it was for healing, for a healthy harvest, you know, the things of a Neolithic agrarian society. But oftentimes it was done late at night by women who are often crones, and everybody else was asleep, and they were supposed to have spent the day without sin, which means they're supposed to have good intentions. And they would sit around, and they're using beeswax. I mean, this is beeswax and a tool. This is a modern version of a tool. Here's the one that's a little more archaic. This is called a kistka in Ukraine, which is a derivation of the word for bone. So they obviously must have been using little bones to create these tools. And then they would draw on the shell. And the wax line would begin this design. It's really interesting how I find it's kind of fascinating on some level that drawing straight lines on curved surfaces brings me to Einstein, but also that drawing these lines on shells, you know, it's kind of like architecture, and it all begins on one line, and then off of that line comes another line in relationship to that line in this space. What's amazing to me about eggs is that they have the same potency and symbolism that they've practically had all through human existence. It's the one thing that remains in our postmodern technological world that still speaks to people very directly, kind of to their hearts in a way, in a really simple, powerful, and profound way. So in my studio also is this like library of things that influenced me. Soviet political posters, I love the red, the bold graphic design, Eros Kalos. This is a book of ancient Greek pottery, a lot of erotic work that a lot of people don't know about. Paul Klee, I've always loved Paul Klee's work, really important influence. The other thing that I've always loved is Tao magic, the secret language of Taoist magical calligraphy. It totally connects me in with eggs as being talismans. And here's the secret language, just like there's a secret language, in a sense, in the designs that are in these traditional eggs here. Why I love working on eggshells is because eggshells, I mean, eggs are events, and the shells are the memories of those events. They're things in themselves that happened in reality. And look at that surface. I mean, look at the the nature of the curvature that is always changing wherever you are on the shell. It's like it's never always the same, and it produces this like beautiful thing that you hold in your hand, and it has its own just like erotic quality of the feeling of the shell. And every different eggshell has a different kind of surface. I mean, these are really rough. I mean, when you feel this shell, it almost feels like stone. And then you like touch a duck shell, and a duck shell is like as soft as a baby's behind. And when you have that real softness, you can produce really amazing effect. Or then you get a goose shell, and a goose shell is like really rough. It's really rough, and because it's rough, you could do things with it and produce these amazing visual effects just because of the shell itself. That's why I love eggs. Now, because eggs do break, what I've started doing is making mosaics out of the broken shells, because as we know, reusing is recycling at its best. So here's one shell that has a bunch of broken globe shells on it. This was a goose shell that had a political message on it about Americans and how we view the world, and I call this piece globalization. Another technique that I've been doing is scratching on a shell, and this is an egg that's dyed black and then scratched. This particular skull image is part of a series that I've been doing that led me also into doing the skull project, which was again taking the intentionality of how we use eggs for a public ritual purpose. This time what we did is we had invited the public to commemorate everybody killed in Iraq. And people came to St. Mark's Church in the Bowery and did eggs, and we gave them dyed black eggs and shells. And then they did the bleach painting motif and did these beautiful skulls. These are images from the skull project that I took. It ran last fall from Columbus Day to Election Day. I've also been doing erotic photography in this room and other places. We call it photo art fantasy. That's what that is. If you want to see some of those? You know, eggs are sexual events. The very existence of eggs connotes sexual activity. So I've also been doing erotic photography. There's Binky the Clown. One of the things I've also been doing is using my photography as referent work for my working on eggs. So here you have an image in the backyard, in my garden, done in black and white photography and then reproduced through the scratching process of working scratching and gilding on the shell to reproduce what it's like to be surrounded in the garden. I love my garden, I love my backyard, I love where I live. I love my little studio in this little Italian mafia neighborhood called the Gowanus Riviera. That's where I live, and that's where my studio is. So why don't you come visit me sometime in the Gowanus Riviera, and we could talk eggs. Or maybe take some photos. How's that sound? How's that?